In June 1971, a shocking discovery was made in the Philippines that captured the attention of the world. Manuel Elizalde announced that he had found an isolated Stone Age tribe near Lake Cebu on the island of Mindanao. They called themselves the Tasaday, and they appeared to be isolated from the rest of the world, both by space and time. Initial contact had apparently been made sometime earlier by a hunter named Defal, who was trapping in the area. He then introduced Elizalde to the tribe. Elizalde was a wealthy businessman and close associate of dictator Ferdinand Marcos. In fact, Elizalde was the head of an organization founded in 1986 called the Presidential Assistant on National Minorities, or PANAMIN. This organization was ostensibly founded to protect the cultural minorities in the Philippines, although some suspected it was just a front that allowed those in power to exploit minority groups and take their resources. The Tasaday were said to live in caves. They had no agriculture and existed as hunter-gatherers. Furthermore, they were a peaceful tribe who, according to Elizalde, had no words for weapons, hostility, or war. He continued describing them by saying, "They didn't even realize there was a country. They didn't realize there was a sea. They did not even know what rice was." He also claimed they had been isolated for 1,000 years. In 1972, the outside world was invited to come see the Tasaday. Western news media eagerly obliged, with the New York Times, National Geographic, the Associated Press, and NBC all covering the tribe. They were even visited by the legendary pilot Charles Lindbergh and the famous American actress turned photojournalist Gina Lollobrigida. Interestingly, the Tasaday referred to Elizalde as Dewata, or God. President Marcos had declared an area of 182 square kilometers to be Tasaday ancestral land. This meant that any outsiders coming in had to be approved first. Those who were approved were then supervised by Elizalde and PANAMIN when interacting with the Tasaday. Linguists discovered that the Tasaday language shared 80 to 85% of its vocabulary with the language of the nearby Manobo tribe, suggesting they had split off more recently than the 1,000 years that was claimed. Researchers were finding some other inconsistencies with the official story around this time as well. One anthropologist observed that the Tasaday had no tools for hunting, fishing, or transporting, and also did not have any folklore, religion, or rituals. In one disturbing incident in June 1972, 2 anthropologists were evacuated from the area after being shot at by an unknown gunman. Finally, in 1976, outsiders were banned from contacting the Tasaday, and guards were stationed around the protected area. This led to a blackout period during which the outside world lost contact with the Tasaday. Eventually, in 1986, the Swiss journalist Oswald Eaton returned to interview the Tasaday. He arrived after President Marcos had been overthrown in the People Power Revolution, and he found that the restrictions barring outsiders were no longer present. The revelations he recorded were fascinating. For one thing, Eaton found the Tasaday wearing modern clothing. Secondly, the caves seemed deserted, with no signs of recent life. One of the Tasaday described the situation by stating, "We didn't live in caves, only near them, until we met Elizalde. Elizalde forced us to live in the caves so that we'd be better cavemen. Before he came, we lived in huts on the other side of the mountain and we farmed. We took off our clothes because Elizalde told us to do so and promised us if we looked poor that we would get assistance. He gave us money to pose as Tasaday and promised us security from counterinsurgency and tribal fighting." While there is still no definitive consensus on the legitimacy of the Tasaday, the prevailing view is that they are in fact a real tribe that was manipulated by Elizalde to pretend to be something that they weren't. In an attempt to make sense of the situation, anthropologist Thomas Headland put forth 8 little-known facts about the Tasaday. They are as follows. Number 1. The Tasaday were found wearing commercially manufactured cloth. They were asked to remove their clothes and wear their, quote, traditional garb. Number 2. The Tasaday must have traded with other tribes. They had brass, metal-tipped arrows, bows made of cultivated bamboo, glass beads, iron knives, and tin cans. Number 3. Nearby tribes ate meat from animals killed by the Tasaday and gave them cultivated food in return. Number 4. The South Cotabato rainforest lacks the amount of starch foods necessary to sustain the Tasaday. Number 5. The Tasaday were never directly observed subsisting on gathered food. Scientists simply assumed they did. Number 6. The Tasaday bamboo tools were cultivated bamboo. Their bamboo was the sun-loving type, which cannot grow in the rainforest. Number 7. The Tasaday stone tools were fake. They were made at the request of the officials in charge. Number 8. In the Tasaday language, 85% of the words were identical to the Cotabato Manobo speech, which is spoken by most of the tribes in the area. As with many things, the official story of the Tasaday seems to lie somewhere between truth and fiction. The consensus seems to be that they were in fact a real tribe, just not the Stone Age cave-dwelling tribe they were depicted to be. It appears they were isolated from others, but it's likely this isolation had only been for around 150 years rather than 1,000. Whatever their way of life, they were finally free to return to it after the exit of Manuel Elizalde and the outside world.